It's McLaren-Mercedes Oscar Piastri on the pole for the sprint race at Spa. 15 laps tomorrow, in theory in the dry, if the weather forecast can be believed. McLaren 1-3 in qualifying, split by Max Verstappen in a much revamped Red Bull Honda. So Oscar on the front row, Max alongside him, looking probably to get a tow on the opening lap, even though DRS won't be deployed at that point. Probably get a tow going into and get a pass going in at the top of the hill. But then, of course, when DRS is activated, Oscar could well then regain the lead, and he's got a massive advantage in Sector 2, where there are lots of medium speed and slower speed corners where the McLaren has a huge advantage over the Red Bull. We'll get onto that in a minute. Just look at the other times of sprint qualifying. Charles Leclerc, good job in the Ferrari to be P4, but look at Esteban Ocon and Oliver Behrman in the Haas Ferrari. Same power unit, and that Haas car very, very near the Ferrari. Quicker indeed in Sector 3. Very impressive performance from both of those two drivers. Carlos Sainz too, good job in the Williams Mercedes after a difficult start to the day. He had a problem getting power onto the road. They got that fixed, software issue, I guess. And Carlos Sainz comfortably through into Q3, doing a good job there. Just as a reminder, they run medium tyres in SQ1, SQ2, and then switch to the soft tyres for SQ3. Pierre Gasly, again, manhandling that Alpine round, doing a very good job. But his teammate, Franco Colapinto, way down the back. Again, no surprise there. That's what we've been seeing a long time. Let's get Jack Doohan back into that second car. So Pierre Gasly also in Q3, very good job, as did Isaac Hadjar, again quicker than Liam Lawson in the other car. And Gabriel Bortoleto, very good job for Sauber Ferrari as well to make it through into Q3. Liam Lawson, the first of the non-qualifiers, if you like, on the medium tyres didn't get into Q3. Head of Yuki Tsunoda, very disappointing again, but again continuing to show, I guess, that the Red Bull is not an easy car to drive despite these recent upgrades. But the big stories of qualifying really were that George Russell didn't get through into Q3, and that Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari didn't get into Q2. He didn't even get out of Q1. George Russell, at the end of his run where he didn't go quickly, and the track got a little bit quicker right at the end, that's when we saw the Haas Ferraris and Bortoleto suddenly going quickly and basically gazumping George out of it. George said the tyres just overheated on the medium tyres. So Mercedes having a lot of tyre temperature issues on the medium tyre. Difficult tyre to manage, quite obviously. And Lewis Hamilton didn't get out of Q1. He was looking pretty good on his opening lap in Q1 till he got to the bottom of the hill around the Stavolo area through a right-hander. There was a lot of dust in front of him because Kimi Antonelli had gone off in the Mercedes. He rejoined, but it was a big, wide lose, lots of gravel on the track as he was rejoining. Lewis had a moment there, and then obviously that was a slow lap, then had to do a second lap. And on the second lap, pretty good lap, would have got into the top 6 or 7 for sure, but lost it completely under braking, would you believe, for the chicane right at the end of the lap. Just lost the rear and spun. I've never seen Lewis do something like that. I mean, he probably has, but I can't remember a time when he's done something just as basic as that. And that, to me, is complete lack of feel, certainly for the back end of the car. Probably the rears were massively overheated. And, of course, he'd done 2 laps by then, so which wasn't a good thing. But very sad to see that. I thought he was driving pretty well. He looked a little bit like the old Lewis that we'd seen at Silverstone. Nice early entries. But just, he must be absolutely destroyed now mentally, I would think, to be starting right at the back there, 3 places from the back, and spinning like that in front of the grandstands, basically in front of the pits. The whole thing, complete mess for Lewis Hamilton. I mentioned the upgrades on the Red Bull, lots of upgrades actually, and I thought on this occasion, well, probably might do all this in the future as well, but I thought it might be interesting and fun for sure to go through the upgrades as described by the teams and looking at the vernacular they use and the descriptions they use. Some teams obviously giving away more information than others, but they do have to describe what they're doing from one race to the next to the car, to the FIA, and that is then made available to the public. So I think it's quite a cool thing. And on this occasion, I think it's because we've had a 3-week hiatus since Silverstone, and quite a lot of these upgrades related to low downforce circuits, Monza coming up as well, and some other circuits with long straights too. We know about those. Quite a lot of them revolving around that. But the most interesting thing is to see how the engineers phrase the work they've been doing from team to team. So let's just start with that. Alpine. Rear wing. The top rear wing has been redesigned and is less loaded. This reduces the drag efficiently and is an option for the upcoming tracks. Well, that's good. Perfect. Got it all sussed. What more do they need to do? Alpine beam wing. The beam wing has also been updated to offer an efficient alternative rear wing assembly suitable for these high efficiency tracks. So yeah, good. When you read it like that, and it's nice and concise, it's almost like describing a meal in a menu, isn't it? You think, well, that's got to be delicious. And when it comes, it isn't actually quite as it seems. But when they've got away with words, these engineers, they're very good. And I say the engineers because I don't believe any non-engineer could be writing any of these descriptions. Aston Martin, front wing. Now with reduced chord, the front wing flap lowers the loading on the front wing to achieve the necessary balance with the lower rear wing expected to be used at this event. Phew. In other words, less downforce, so they're making modifications. A new front wing assembly is based on a previous version with modified sections to suit the revised nose. At this event, it is introduced with a low-powered flap. I always love it when engineers refer to aero in terms of power. This wing develops a lot of power. And of course, that is a real description because it is power. It's air on the surface and it's generating downforce. It's just that we laymen don't really use the word power very much when we describe aero, do we? Well, I don't anyway. Aston Martin, still the nose. A shorter nose with the wing mounted from the second element improves the flow on the front wing assembly, generating an improved performance through the operating range of the car. Again, a little bit like the menu. Well, in that case, how can they possibly lose? It's interesting, I think, to look at these because potentially these are the first real changes made by Adrian Newey since he joined the team. I'm not saying that's the case, but they're the sort of things where he might have got involved because it's front and rear wing and it's sort of the peripherals of the car, which are changeable and can be modified, obviously, relatively easily. Nothing structural here. So maybe we're seeing a little bit of Adrian Newey in these descriptions. Aston Martin rear wing. The upper rear wing with smaller sections for reduced front view area, in other words, frontal area, is less loaded than previous options to reduce drag in line with the expected setup for this circuit. Okay, fair enough. Aston Martin beam wing, that's the wing below the main wing. The rear wing and beam wing are less loaded than previous options to reduce drag in line with expected setup. So lots of mods there, a lot of work. Ferrari, rear suspension geometry, rear corner elements. It's interesting they talk about rear corner in the singular always, as if there's only one corner, but I'm sure they mean both. I hope they do anyway. All the teams seem to do that. This revision of the rear suspension geometry triggered a re-optimization of wishbone fairings as well as lower and upper winglet cascades with the aim to maximize aerodynamic efficiency. Interesting, eh? You can imagine at Ferrari in the drawing office, the way they segmented that and the way they got on with that. Okay, we're doing a new rear suspension geometry. The team over there will re-optimize wishbone fairings. The team over here will work on the upper winglet cascades. And there'll be all little subdivisions doing all that and trying to get the result they want in terms of more downforce, better airflow, less drag, whatever it is. And if they achieve that, back in Maranello, long before they get to the Belgian Grand Prix, there will be a bit of champagne cork popping for sure, because it's a little team working on these little things. I say little, they're enormous in terms of the performance of the car. So yeah, you can imagine all that, those subdivisions going on at Maranello. Ferrari rear wing flap element. Given the aerodynamic efficiency requirements of the Spa-Francorchamps circuit, nice to see them spelling the name out in full like that. A lower downforce modulation will be made available. Lower downforce modulation. Reducing the chord of the rear wing flap element. Good. Sounds as if that's kind of a direct translation from the Italian by Google to me, but anyway, we'll see. McLaren, low downforce rear wing. I say, just going back to Ferrari, I mean, when you read that, you think, well, with all these mods and all that, how can they possibly not be the quickest car on the track? Things stay the same, don't they? They don't tend to change very much, despite all this work, all these mods. McLaren, pretty basic for Spa. Why, if the car's brilliant, why change too much of it? Low downforce rear wing. Updated version of the low downforce rear wing assembly, improving overall efficiency across a similar drag range, suitable for multiple circuits. In other words, bad news for everybody else. And I'm sure McLaren know exactly what they're doing there, and they've got a nice improvement. Mercedes front wing, increasing the chord on the front wing's second element local to the end plate and reducing the forward element chord redistributes the tip vorticity and improves tire squirt and lower weight control. Now, I think everybody should have to learn that verbatim and repeat it 10 times quickly. I mean, good. all I can say is hats off to the engineers, because I don't know what they're talking about, but I'm sure they know precisely what they're doing, even though it doesn't seem to have made much difference to the Mercs so far this weekend. Rear corner again in the singular. Moving the drum lip inboard increases vorticity shed off the top edge, resulting in more outwash and improved rear tyre upper wake control. They love these obscure words, quaint words sometimes, engineers. Vorticity, not a word you hear very much. And I always remember James Allison talking about prosecuting a revision on the car, which is the correct use of the word prosecuting. I mean, they use these words. It's just wonderful, I think. And all that is mixed in with other great little phrases like more outwash and upper wake control. Yes, everybody has to look as if they understand what it all means. I think it means really, they just hope it's all going to make the car quicker, which it usually doesn't. Racing Bulls. Diffuser, interesting. Nobody else talking about the diffuser for Spa, but anyway, doing a mod to the diffuser. The shape of the diffuser has been revised in order to improve the flow conditioning around the rear of the car. Well, yeah, we hope that's pretty much what it is going to do, because what else would it do if they're revising it? Rear wing as well at Racing Bulls. The upper rear wing has been changed to meet the needs of the target downforce and efficiency level for the circuit. Well, what is the target downforce and efficiency level? Is it the one they know McLaren have got, or is it one that Red Bull A-Team have got, or the one that they wish they had and they just arbitrarily going for it? We'll never know, will we? Red Bull A-Team now, the front wing. There are a lot of changes to the Red Bull, and I think it is probably going a little bit better. It's just that McLaren are also still going a little bit better too, so far anyway in the weekend. Front wing, the geometric changes revised the pressure distribution across primarily the first two elements of the assembled wing, raising the overall load derived from the assembly. In other words, more downforce. Good. Well, let's hope that manifests itself on the full lap. Yeah, right. Red Bull side pod inlet. Now this does cause drag, obviously the size of the inlet to the side pod. Noting the tracks approaching which challenge the power unit cooling systems, in other words, they've had some overheating problems, the inlet to the side pod radiators has been enlarged to exploit the better pressure now available. So yeah, they've gone to bigger inlets, which will cause drag because they've been having some overheating issues. And now, in line with that, the coke line engine cover has been revised. Coke line is, if you look at the engine cover head on, it's that sort of shape, a little bit like a Coke bottle. That's what that comes from. And all the engineers seem to refer to that. It's part of, and the FIA, it's part of the, well, I think it's actually in the technical regulations as well. Having changed the side pod inlet, that made it larger, and therefore the split lines to the side pod part of the top body, the engine cover has been revised to link the side pod to the floor, maintaining the same cooling exit louver options. The inboard rear suspension shrouds have been revised to suit the new top body despite attaching to the bonded gearbox assembly. So I think what that means is they've got a few gaps that have appeared as a result of that, a few sharp edges, and maybe they're just smoothing everything over just to make sure there are no little vortices being generated, and reminding the FIA that the top body is still attached to the bonded gearbox assembly, which I guess they have to do for the regulations. Red Bull front suspension, revised inboard fairings on the top wishbone add more camber. Blending between suspension and chassis surfaces aids the pressure available at the new side pod inlet, therefore enhancing the cooling. So all this is to do with the cooling that is going on, and they've had to revise the inboard fairings as well. So when they said we've got some overheating issues, look at all the other things that then had to be changed on the car. Hopefully for an improvement. It's written in quite a positive vein, isn't it? But we talk about upgrades. In reality, this possibly isn't an upgrade. It's just getting the car to be a little bit more efficient cooling-wise. Red Bull rear corner, again in the singular. The rear wheel bodywork cascade wing assembly has locally more camber and a trailing edge trim to the end plate, adding load whilst maintaining flow stability. Oh, well, there you go. With that, Max is bound to be super quick in Sector 2 at Spa. No evidence of that yet, but, well, maybe he would be a lot slower if they didn't have that, this rear wing bodywork, lower cascade wing assembly mod. They love it, don't they, the engineers? They love it. Floor fences on the Williams, lot on the Williams. And I think Williams actually should get the prize for the best descriptions by the engineers of what they've been doing. And there's a lot of work on the cars here for Spa. The revised fence geometries redistribute the balance of loading through the floor fence channels. We're talking about the fences on the floor at the bottom of the car now. This increases the local front of floor loading as well as improving the potential for the downstream flow. Yeah, as you would expect. makes the car quicker, hopefully. Floor edges, big difference, really. The floor edge wing and spat. There you go. I haven't heard that word for a while. These engineers say it's brilliant. The vernacular they delve into have been reprofiled with a more complex curvature. Another nice word. The lateral hole at the rear of the spat has also been subtly reshaped. That's a quite poetic thing, isn't it? Subtly reshaped. You don't often see that those two words together in a technical description of the car. These modified geometries capitalize on the revised local onset flow, not only to improve local load along the edge of the floor, but also to benefit the inlet condition to the main diffuser. Yeah, got that out. Quite sure what it all means. I think it means, yeah, the car's going to be good. Williams side pod inlet. A little bit like Red Bull now. The lower lip of the side pod cooling inlet has been modified and is now lower at the inboard end and higher at the outboard end. This supports the revisions to the bodywork described whilst maintaining the same inlet cooling flow. The revisions to the side pod inlet work in combination with the downstream changes to the floor edges and side pod coke line. Whilst maintaining the required level of internal power unit cooling flow, we've also improved the level of potential flow energy to the rear of the car. So maybe they've done a better job than Red Bull. Not only have they made it cooler, but they've actually improved the potential flow energy. Wow. How do you measure things like that from car to car? But it'd be wonderful to do it. Put them all together or mix and match all the engineers for one day to see what they're all doing. Williams coke line engine cover. This is the last one. There is a deeper undercut to the bodywork, which is married to a modified floor upstand. I'll repeat that, which is married to a modified floor upstand. Lovely, isn't it? This is achieved by raising the lower surface of the main side pod belly. Again, I haven't seen that word used for a long time in a technical description. This in turn is achievable because of the changes to the side pod inlet. So quite a lot of side pod description going on here. The changes to the external side pod floor undercut help to improve the flow distribution to the floor edge and spat region, the spat region of the car, where it is utilized to improve the local floor load. And let's hope all that isn't taken off in some sort of first corner skirmish, because all the engineers, the technicians that have produced all those wonderful spats and upstands, they're precious to them. It's part of their life. And they could all go flying in the air in the first corner. Lassour's hairpin on lap one. Anyway, let's get down to business now, the real business now. Reality, really, I think is what we're talking about. To look at the difference between Oscar and Lando and how Oscar was able to put that lap together. Pretty similar in a straight line. Very similar in a straight line. Oscar 338, Lando Norris 337, so 1 kilometre per hour difference, enough I suppose to annoy Lando, but just only one. It wasn't really till they got to turn 9, which is if turn 8 is the irritating, annoying downhill long right hand of the horseshoe shaped corner where you get nothing but understeer and you just got to wait before you can get on the power. Then there's a short burst of power. Then turn 9 is even more irritating. It's a negative, well, it feels like negative camber, left-hander downhill, a corner where it's very easy to be slow and incredibly difficult, a bit like the left-hander at the top of the hill at Imola that I was talking about after Tosa. Very difficult to be quick there and to pick up time. But look at the differences. In turn 9, middle of turn 9, Oscar Piastri 217, Lando Norris 213. That's not just minimum speeds. Oscar's minimum speed there was 213 like Lando's, but he was only briefly there, whereas Lando sat at 213, pretty slow mid-corner, presumably with understeer, just waiting to get on the power, whereas Oscar was in and out of the power very, very quickly there, very good braking into the minimum speed point. And where Lando's doing 213 at exactly the same point, Oscar's already accelerating 217. So there's a big difference there in turn 9. And just for comparison, to show you where Red Bull are, quicker in a straight line, 343 compared with Lando Norris 337. So big difference there, 6 kilometers an hour. The Red Bull much quicker in a straight line. So Max is always going to be good in terms of getting a tow from the car in front of him and in terms of sector 1 anyway. But sector 2, and let's call turn 9 a classic example of what sector 2 is all about. It is all about downforce and grip. Just as a reminder, at a specific point in the middle of turn 9, Oscar Piastri 217, that's not his minimum speed, but at that point Max Verstappen 211. 6 kilometers an hour slower than Oscar Piastri in the middle of turn 9. And that is the difference between a McLaren and a Red Bull. Now, it's interesting because after that, it's downhill straight. And they're going to Pouhon, which I talk about often as one of the great corners in Formula One. One of the great corners, no doubt about it. And it proved itself to be that today as well. Big differences between the two McLaren drivers and big differences between the McLarens and everything else. Both McLaren drivers accelerating through the gears out of turn 9 into 8th. As they're going into Pouhon, they stay in 8th. Neither of them brake. The only difference is that Oscar Piastri comes out of the throttle about 10%. Lando Norris comes out of the power for longer at about 35 to 40%. So Oscar just slight lift and then flat again. Lando Norris a bigger lift for longer and then flat again, both in 8th gear. Charles Leclerc brakes in the soft tyre. We're talking about these quickest runs on the soft tyre in SQ3. Charles Leclerc on his quickest run, they all only got one run anyway, braked into Pouhon, lifted and braked. Beautiful lack of overlap, just perfect synchronization between throttle and brake, but he does brake going in there. And like Max, holds it in 7th gear. He doesn't get 8th before the corner. He holds it in 7th out of that run down the hill. Max Verstappen, though, hats off to Max Verstappen. There's always a Max Verstappen story in qualifying in some form or another, and this, of course, is sprint qualifying. I've got to remind you of that. But into Pouhon, Max staying in 7th gear, like Oscar Piastri, just lifts about 10%, no braking, and at the exact point of entry where you can measure the difference between Oscar and all the other drivers, an exact point they go through, at that moment, Max Verstappen, 296, Oscar Piastri, 292, Lando Norris, 291, Charles Leclerc, 287. Big difference. Who's quickest into Pouhon? Max Verstappen. Exited Pouhon, again, Max Verstappen capitalizing on that entry speed, 302, now in 8th gear. Oscar Piastri, 299. Lando Norris, 297, the same as Charles Leclerc, 297. But that's where it kind of ends for Max. He's super quick through Pouhon, but then you get to the medium speed corners, typified by turn 14, which is a really important corner because it leads on to the long uphill stretch right up to the chicane where Lewis Hamilton spun. And on that corner, in the middle of that corner, which is all about downforce and grip and what state the tyres are in at that point of the lap. And on that measurable point of the corner, turn 14, medium speed corner, Oscar Piastri 178, Charles Leclerc 175, Lando Norris 174, Max Verstappen 169. He's in 5th gear. He's letting the car roll in 5th, whereas the two McLarens are in 4th. They can really get the revs up and they can really use the tyres through there. But Max, probably already feeling that his tyres are starting to overheat, keeps it in 5th to float the car a little bit more, not ask quite as much of the rear tyres. And look at that, he's 5 kilometers an hour down on a really important corner, which is the one which leads on the uphill run on the straight. And that's obviously where Max's lap has gone. If you look at the top speeds, yeah, Max quick 343, but that's a speed also matched by Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari 343, and guess what, by the two Haas Ferraris as well, with the Ferrari engine, the same power unit as the factory Ferraris. The Haas is right up there, 343, whereas the McLarens 337 for Lando Norris and for Oscar Piastri 338. So a big difference there between Red Bull and McLaren in a straight line. And just as turn 9 is a snapshot of what is going on in Sector 2, where Max is losing time in Sector 2, that top speed is a snapshot of how much inherent downforce the McLarens have compared with the Red Bulls. And we can't say on this occasion, as we could at Silverstone, well, maybe McLaren are artificially running more wing because it may be wet for the race, because at the moment, and at the time of qualifying, it's predicted to be dry for the sprint race. Of course, it may well be different as we go into qualifying for the Grand Prix, with still a wet race to be forecast. So that sprint qualifying, it's a little bit artificial, as I say, because medium tyres for the first 2 parts of qualifying and then soft tyres for the third. That needs to be borne in mind when you look at the sprint qualifying results. And also Mercedes obviously not very good on the medium tyre. I suspect they would have been okay on the soft, but they were so slow on the medium they didn't even get through into SQ3 anyway. And then we had Lewis Hamilton, and then with that spin, I guess, to do with the rear tyres overheating as well. Anyway, we'll see what happens in the sprint race. Qualifying after that tomorrow for the wet race, predicted to be the wet race on Sunday. You can never tell really in the Ardennes Forest, but nonetheless that is the prediction, and we'll see what happens then. A big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja, and of course to REC Watches, and to you the viewer. Take care, see you then.